go!
So now, folks, for our latest retrospect review, let us celebrate 20 years of Batman Begins. My oh my, how time flies, right? But yeah, in this case, folks, we're not gonna do a breakdown of everything that happened on the show because, yeah, for us, we know the show not so much by heart, but we know this show, right? So there's really no need for us to break down everything, right? It's still fresh in our minds, you know what I mean? And in this case, we're just gonna talk about, yeah, how we still feel about the movie. And I don't know about you, Ricardo, but I actually rewatched the film after having seen it, like a few years back, right? Basically, right? And yeah, just shade how I feel about the show now, right? So as we always do when it comes to retrospect reviews, we have to talk about when we first saw this film, right? So for me, and I feel it's the same way with you, right? Yeah, when internet culture started to grow, especially when it comes to film criticism and whatnot, right? Yeah, Batman and Robin was like, the show that was just being punched in the face umpteen times, right? By a lot of YouTubers, right? It's like Batman and Robin is like the worst Batman movie ever, right? And you could see how that just tarnished the name of Batman as far as live action goes, right? Yes, like the animated thing, like they were still doing this thing back then, right? I think around that time, right? The Batman, which I still honestly think is a criminally underrated Batman animated series. I have a lot of fun with that show, but I know some people is like,
it started off doing its own thing and then became like just kind of copying the other material. But I remember when that show first started, I thought it had a lot of interesting calls, and then it just became Batman as we understood it. And I was like, I get what you might do. I get why they did this, but I wasn't a fan.
Yeah,
I preferred it in its very early incarnation. That first and second season, especially.
I understand, right? Yeah. So, the animation stuff was going on, right? So it's not like, like fans didn't care about Batman because of that one movie from friggin' 1997, right? Batman was about, right? There was Justice League, there was Justice League Unlimited, there was The Batman, there was Batman Brave and Bold, and all these stuff, right? And there was Batman Beyond. How could I forget about that? Because that was when it was starting to wrap up, right? Basically, right? So we started hearing about Batman Begins. Like, all right, okay, we're doing this, all right? And it's directed by Christopher Nolan, right? And at the time, right, this was when my fandom of Nolan started to, culminate, right? For me, seeing Memento for the first time was like, oh, so what is this, Dread? Non-linear narrative. What is this, right? You know what I mean? So that was like the beginning for me when it came to me really appreciating Nolan's films, right? Then of course there was The Prestige, which I did not see in theaters, but I saw it when it showed on cable. I was like, oh, I wish I saw this in cinema. What?
Yeah, no, I saw The Prestige in theaters. That was like one of the last films I saw in National.
Okay.
And I saw it double. With the movie that this fellow win the Oscar for. Oh shit, it's slipping my mind right now.
2004. What would it be? Boy?
Yeah, no. Who win for? Oh gosh, what's his name? By Idi Amin. Shit, slipping my mind right now.
Oh, The Last King of Scotland. You saw that?
Last King of Scotland. Thank you. Yeah, I saw that.
Oh, you saw that as a double. Whoa, okay.
Double. So I went to see Last King of Scotland, not taking anything from The Prestige. I was like, hey, as the guy who made Batman, I kind of like that movie, but like, it's not that thing. And then that ended up being the highlight. That ended up blowing me away as being and still to this day, probably my favorite Nolan movie.
Right. Right. So maybe I just get my dates crossed now because I think Prestige came after Batman Begins. I can't remember right now, right?
Prestige came after Batman Begins.
Right. It was a year afterwards. Okay, so sorry about that, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, at the time, I was starting to know who Nolan was, right? Still to this day, believe it or not, I still have not watched Insomnia. That is still on my to-watch list, right? And it's so funny that, afterwards he will do a movie called Inception, but more on that at another date, right? But moving on. So when Batman Begins, you started hearing about, this thing coming out, right? I will never forget seeing the first clip or teaser of it, right? And it's just basically what would be the intro, the first shot in the movie itself, right? Where it's like this orange sky and you're seeing a bunch of bats fly.
Yeah.
And then they form the logo. It's like, all right, this gotta be something. This going to be something, right?
I was really blown away by Just to look at it, I remember seeing one of the first trailers. I'm like, oh shit, this gonna be good. Though.
Yeah.
Like, it looked great, different. I remember like a bunch of hype. Before this, so like this, I remember this was like 2001. I remember like, oh, they're gonna have Harley Quinn and they're gonna be Madonna as Harley Quinn and they're gonna have the Scarecrow in the next Batman 5 and so on and so on. So they were pushing these ideas. So they was always pushing to have another one, but because Batman and Robin was such a disaster, they had to completely rehaul. And yeah, at the time, this was another big factor. It's being post 9/11. Everything had to be all grounded and gritty and realistic, and yeah, Nolan for better or for worse really tapped into that in great ways.
He did, yes.
Yeah, so it's that, and I remember seeing that Batman trailer, in on your computer in 240p or whatever.
Oh yeah. Yes, yeah. I remember that. Yeah,
but it looked great. It looked great. I was like, holy shit, this is gonna be hard.
Yes. And especially with all the changes that you saw there, right? I was like, all right, we're doing this, from the ground up. I love this, right? Now we will talk about this where we share our thoughts, right, on the show, right? But yes, I know that when it comes to this movie in particular, right, and of course the Dark Knight trilogy, right? Yeah, there will be the people who will be like, I don't like this Batman, this grounded in reality, this gritty, realistic Batman. I don't like that. I more prefer the Tim Burton stuff and the TV show stuff and, the animated TV show stuff, right? They'll prefer that more than the grounded reality stuff, right? But I thought, like, in the case of this, it was a perfect call, actually, right? Because look at the title, Batman Begins. This is actually the first Batman movie, if I'm not mistaken, right, to ever show the beginnings of Batman, right? I mean, this is nothing new in terms of comic book movies, right? We saw it with Well, it was done in was it done in the animated series? I think I think Mask of the Phantasm touched on this, right?
Mask of the Phantasm, right?
Yes, it did, right? Yeah.
Sorry, yes.
Right, but we never really saw it in live action, right? So here's okay, we could. It was just always hinted at in terms of his beginning and all that kind of stuff, right? But in this case, okay, we start from the beginning. It makes sense, right? So yeah, why not do things in a different way? We're not seeing redo the glamorous, over the top, theatrical vibe of Joel Schumacher's films, or the the gothic vibe of the Tim Burton films. Let's do something new, right? And in the case of Nolan, right, this is where he really started to show that, hey, I can do big budget action movies, so I could do that, right? So you can see, like, this was the testing ground before he would do Inception and Dunkirk and stuff like that, right? This is where he really, really started to flex his muscle, right? So just to get into, like, when I saw it for the first time, right? So saw it, opening weekend, large crowd. People were reacting to the show, laughing at certain points and whatnot, right? And I was just digging the hell out of the show, just how the story built and whatnot. Really admiring the creative liberties it took with certain characters like Ra's al Ghul and all these characters like that, right? And even Scarecrow and all too. We'll touch on them in a bit, right? But for me, one of the things that drew me from the job though was the score that Hans Zimmer did, right? Just and it become kind of synonymous with with Nolan's big budget films, especially with Inception, right? Exactly. That whole shepherd's tone, that and then it just increases and just hit this this grand note now. So when you hear this music and that style used for the Batman score, right? I'm getting chills, like even when I'm thinking about the score right now, I get chills, because it just captures the vibe of it so well, right? It is dark, it is brooding, but it's also triumphant, it's also adventurous, right? It just sets things on this grand scale, right? Just let just to paraphrase what you said when we talked about the 89 Batman, this is not your grandfather's Batman. This is going to be something new, something different. You're going to feel it. I'm going to make sure that you feel it when you watch this film, right? And yeah, I absolutely enjoyed Batman Begins, right? Wrapping up here. So when it came out on cable, watch it over. And then, of course, Dark Knight came, blew me out of the water. I absolutely love that film. It's one of the best. It probably is, in my opinion, the best superhero sequel ever made, in my opinion. Love that film, 5 out of 5, right? We talked about that years ago, right? And then from there, that was when Nolan was saying, all right, well, I do them 2 shows. All right, Inception all the asses now. And just selling myself out right here before we talk about Inception, slight spoiler. Yeah, Inception is one of my top 10 favorite movies of the past decade. I think this was Nolan at his peak though when it comes to just big budget filmmaking, right? And yes, we could argue for days about the quality of The Dark Knight Rises, right? But I still love the film. I admire the effort in terms of closing the trilogy. Even though because I mean, Dark Knight was not the end. You could treat it as the end, but no, that was a to be continued. That was a to be continued, right? It's just that, and even Nolan and his brother Jonathan would admit this, it was just so hard to top The Dark Knight, right? So that's why Rises came out the way it did, right? But yes, I would admit there are some problematic moments, some logic moments where it's like, no, that don't make sense. Why? How he was in this pit and he get out and suddenly he in Gotham City? Like, how long does this take? Understand you could tell, but well, when I make my movies and when I show editing, I don't need to tell you if it's 2 days later, because that's my style. It's like, still, how you get from there in the desert to Gotham City? I just see.
No, it was clumsy. I mean,
It was.
I always, with that film, it always felt like, well, Heath Ledger died, and the entire time you're just like, yeah, Heath Ledger died. Like, you can't get around that. It really felt like that.
Exactly, but I still love the film, though. It feels like a nice denouement to the series and what it was about, right? But yeah, at the end of the day, it all began with this movie that came out in 2005, and I'll close this, right? Let's shout out to Wikipedia for saying this, right? There's a section of the page where they say, yeah, look how many filmmakers were influenced by this movie, right? Just saying, oh, the dark, gritty, and grounded reality style actually works, right? And agree to disagree on this one before I shut up. We would not have the MCU. Jon Favreau would not have made Iron Man the way he did if it wasn't for Batman Begins. Because yes, that grounded reality style is what Jon Favreau used on Iron Man.
Yeah,
and it worked.
It worked. It's somewhat influence you can see. Because a lot of people thought with The Dark Knight, it was kind of done. Like, oh, that's it. No more comic book movies. You can't top that. And if you have to top that level of quality. And, well, they clearly had for lack of a better, I don't know what's the official term, but like a kind of blue ocean strategy with respect to that. Just tapping into something. Not tapping, and there's more, okay, we can flip back to. I just thought it was the end of, like, in my opinion, Dark Knight was the end of the whole being too gritty and being ashamed of the source material aspect of it. Dark Knight nailed it because it's one franchise you can kind of get away with the source material and not catering to it in the way we do, because Batman is a very predominantly silly comic when it needs to be, right?
That's
but at the same time, it can be very clear. Yeah, Batman is one of the most malleable characters in that sense, right? You could tie him anywhere with the conceit. Most other comic book characters can't really do that. So that is why it ended that, but then it gives space for people to say, all right, now, let's do this comic book stuff for real. And that way the MCU come in and nail it.
Yeah, and remember same year Dark Knight came out was when Iron Man came out, right? So, and the rest is history.
Exactly.
Yeah, so Ricardo, before we jump into just our retrospective thoughts on Batman Begins, talk about your history with the film. Where you were, when you first saw it, how you felt, see it afterwards. Or I should mention, by the way, folks, this quick story, quickly, I went out of my way to buy the Dark Knight box set on DVD, right? This was before I even acquired an external Blu-ray drive. Sorry, well, I had a Blu-ray drive on my old laptop, right? But whatever. And then eventually when I graduated to Blu-ray, I got the Dark Knight box set, right? The Blu-ray box set, right? Which is still one of my prized possessions, right? But that all goes to show, just how much I love the Dark Knight trilogy. And it would not have started if it wasn't for Batman Begins. But anyway, Ricardo, take it away, your history with Batman Begins.
My thing was, I remember this, I think I had a class I had to do it during the summer for this. So it was, I was, with friends, otherwise I wouldn't have been. And I just remember just thinking, one, how cool and grounded and interesting it is. That was one. And then two, the idea that, this guy, what Nolan does well, and again, we get to see this with the Prestige, it's just the conceit towards explaining away stuff. Like, that is why this works so well. Like, I don't love this movie as much as other people do, but I just really appreciated it for two reasons. One, how grounded everything is, and again, our generation of nerd fandom wanted to, like, explain away everything, and it have to make sense in the real world in some way, or you come up with some kind of grounded answer to blah 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 blah. And I find, I mean, I kind of grow to that, to be honest. But it really works with this. That was one. And then two, easily one of my favorite villains in Batman. And I arguably is my probably personal favorite villain in all of Batman, Ra's al Ghul. You actually get Ra's al Ghul in a movie, John. Like it, and I thought because I saw the promos and thinking, all right, the promo's going to be a certain way. I saw who was quote unquote, we put that in quotes, Rachel Gould in the beginning, and then they give the fake out in the film, and it's like, oh, both work though as a casting. And that's a real good like conceit though, and they play with that in some interesting because as what like what they do in the beginning, I kind of hated, but then they pay it off later. It's like, all right, this is real hard, and they make it work as a central premise. And yeah, I just thoroughly appreciated this film for what it was. Stuff with Scarecrow is great. Stuff with just the plot. The plot is a silly sci-fi plot. Like I admit that. I ain't fighting it down. But again, Nolan is all about aesthetics and good lamp shading, and just the how he built this. Where he get this from. They explain away the whole which was Lucius Fox thing. So, how it is he didn't build everything in the Batcave. At least that was the working implication to me in the cartoon. Like, oh, he and Alfred build all this shit now. Like, no, it is an R&D division, and now if the R&D division is do the right thing, because most of this come from the military anyway, and so on and so forth, right? They pay that off in the second film great with the money guy. I forget the guy again, Coleman Reese. That's a whole beat. So that can imply that it's not just 2 or 3 people know who Batman is, but like at least a dozen people. And all these little small things, right? They just add up and just explain the world and build the world out really well. And it worked. Like just little small things like mentioning, oh, it have people on the internet looking for him and trying to make sense of who this person is. And so on and so forth. And I just dug this. And it's just a solid story. Solid beats. Just like so many great moments in terms of introducing the character. The opening act sequence really works with him just like going through his struggles and then coming back to the city and all of that, and him as a real kind of disheveled young Bruce Wayne, even though he had the money in a mess. And all of the stuff they do and him having to become Batman and him having to justify it and make it work, it totally fit in this world.
Right.
Totally fit. Everything comes together really well, really, really intelligent and smart. Just solid storytelling and filmmaking just comes together and make a good thing. And again, they pay it off in smart ways in the sequel, and they do a really good job with just telling you how to interpret this Batman. But again, Batman is one of the few characters that can get away with this, right? Because of the aesthetic of the character. And we can get into a big debate about the fandom, and I think this movie, and well, especially the second film, brought in some of the worst types of fans, the ones who demand the realism, and they started getting into stupid debates about real things and real world things. Like, you could stop that. Like, at a certain point, it works. Another thing about this, and we got to get into that with this, but there's a somewhat undertone, and it's mostly because of the politics at the time of the war on terror, right? Batman is very, 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 GWOT, Guatan inspired, right? It really pulls from like the terrorism thing, the money, when the money going, how heavily militarized the police is, but they play with that with Batman. And Batman has always been a kind of back and forth character with a lot of people who respect that. Like, I like Batman a lot, but there's already somewhat problematic undertone with a lot of the characterization, especially Nolan's take on it. Especially you saw that in the second film, like what Batman had to do to beat the Joker. It's like, oh, Bats, Brucey boy, what are you doing? And they play with it, but they bounce off of it, and for the most part, they do a decent enough job with that conceit. And I just thoroughly loved it in that sense. Yeah, I really like this movie, and it goes down as a big flashpoint for comic book filmmaking, in my opinion.
Yeah, totally agree, right? So for one thing, as you talk about his beginnings, if you will, right? I like that it did not have to. You see, like I'll do the comparison with Spider-Man, right? Where yes, it has to fit with the whole kid gets bit by a spider kind of thing, right? And you see what happens from that point on, right? Uncle Ben had to get killed, all that kind of stuff, right? So this case, the one consistent thing has to be, well, the death of Martin Thomas Wayne, right? I like that in this case you actually see what led to that, right? Which is, Bruce as a kid, with his fear of bats, right? I love that, how that's set up from the very, very beginning, right? With him and Rachel Dawes and the kids, and then he falls down that well, and then he sees the bats and he gets frightened, right? So now, when he's at that opera and he's seeing the characters just as bat, he's like, yeah, there can we go, and all that kind of stuff, right? And then when he goes outside, now that's when Joe Chill, the guy comes to kill him.
Right, so they kind of set up the conceit of him like tying the kind of blaming himself a little bit.
Yeah.
Because he won. If they went out later, it would have been fine. Look, in the typical story, the movie ends.
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually the Zorro or something else. But I forget which movie I was watching this time. But it's that, right?
Yeah, I think it's always the Marcus Zorro, I think.
Yeah, it's almost always Zorro. Like it's that. So you don't know. Because I see the thematic implication or the thematic undertone of the whole thing. It's like, Zorro is basically Batman before Batman was Batman. So it's like that.
And I like that just just the world building in this movie is brilliant, right? So I love that the show does not stop and say, oh, random guy pulls out a gun and that's the end of that. Though they follow up years later where he was arrested, right? But then they try to get him on early release now, and then while a teen. Okay, so not so much a teenage Bruce Wayne, but he just grew up, right? So yes, it is Christian Bale playing him, but is that right?
He's a young adult.
Right.
Which it kind of works, but the problem is, look, Christian Bale looking a little too big, man, a little hardbacky for that.
I know, and even though they do the thing with the hair, it's like, it's still you, right? Like it's still you.
It'll still fight.
Yeah, exactly. And then he runs into
it was noticeable.
That is true. And then he runs into Rachel Dawes, who I think is either a DA or DA's assistant, right? I'm going to talk about her in a bit, right? But yeah, and...
I start to say it. This is one of those weird things that there's always like invent a character for these things. And...
Yeah.
He has the problem. Two things. So the first one is that Katie Holmes is by far the weakest thing in this movie.
I was going to jump to that, but yes, it is true. And it's so funny. It's so funny for me, right? Is that looking back now, yes, even back then, people were criticizing her. Like, they just like, okay, you could tell me if you find her performance is bad. I don't think it was. I think it's just the lines are very like they just so on the nose. Like everything she tells Bruce, like look at the city, look at how the city is crumbling. Like she's kind of telegraphing the message to us through her dialogue, right? But then she just kind of underdeveloped, right, as a character.
No, the problem is that compared to the ensemble, it's like she's like by far the lowest. I mean, you have freaking, Christian Bale, you have Cillian Murphy, you have
Gary Oldman, Ken Watanabe, yep. Mm-hmm.
I mean, we call him who played Liam Neeson,
Michael Caine, Morgan Freeman, and you have Katie Holmes, right? You're right.
Because who they replace her with is light years ahead.
Yeah, Maggie Gyllenhaal. I mean, and she had such great emotional moments in The Dark Knight, especially when she was about to die in that one scene. Yeah.
So it's that, like, come on. So Katie Holmes was totally out of her depth. Sorry to say it, like, I was never a fan of her as an actress. So she was never that great. Like, she was on Dawson's Creek, but I thought the other girl on Dawson's Creek was always more talented anyway. So it's like, whatever. She was never that great for me. Yeah, totally out of her depth. And it really come across like some Hollywood bullshit because, it was, I think she was Tom Cruise's wife at the time. It really feel like that. Like, she has got work. But I thought she was not like objectively terrible or anything like that. Just like flat. Like, that's weak. By far the weakest thing.
Yeah, and unfortunately, they didn't really give her much to do, though. Like, she has a role to play, right? But it's not really that much, compared to who you would expect from a love interest of Bruce Wayne, right? But yeah, you know what I mean? In terms of just how the story is built, right? The world building, I should say, is very well done, right? I love how they set up the whole thing with the train, the fact that, Thomas Wayne built it, and I love how it also emphasizes on this thing.
Yeah, they leave to the conceit of the Waynes being like really hopeful and putting all the energy on the thing that you should be doing with your money.
Yes.
Like that's why it's one thing that a lot of people is like kind of miss with Batman. And I get why they might say this, but like a lot of people miss that conceit about the whole if Batman's so rich, why does he don't do this, that, and the other with the money? Because that make more sense. It's like no, the Waynes were doing that. Like that's already written in most versions of the story. It's just because Bruce so cynical. They play with that characterization of him saying, the parents' approach failed. Like that's what you think. I was like, no, you just don't know how to do it well, and is your trauma still driving you? And a lot of people seem to like deliberately ignore this. Like it's that. I don't know. It's like one of those kind of willful misrepresentations of the character. Again, I do think Batman kind of problematic once he start hitting against the real world. But there's one thing that I always thought people kind of, again, it's shocking how so many people just miss this. It always felt like that. But like, no, the Waynes tried the right way.
Yes,
and it failed, so they were killed. But that's because from his perspective as a child, dealing with that trauma, he didn't really process the information properly.
Right.
And, and you can get into a big debate about, like, it should be Alfred to run in. He's saying, no. That's the story. You're running to that.
Right. And also going back to the realism of things, right? I love the fact that, the Waynes and like the super rich they're super rich, yes, right? But it's not like all the problems the world was solved by them, right? They had people who were working along them, right? So you had the late great Rutger Hauer, I forgot the character's name, right? Basically managing finances, and as soon as the Waynes gone and Bruce went on this. Yeah, he was, right? And then
completely forget he was in this joint.
Yeah. And that was a great casting call, in my opinion, right? Because I mean, we know him as Roy Batty from from Blade Runner, right? And of course, Blind Fury, but it's Blind Fury, right?
I love him in a criminally underrated video game called Observer.
He was in that game?
Yeah, he was the star of a video game called Observer. It's a great, like, weird cyberpunk kind of thing. I absolutely love that video game. It's so great, and he's great in that.
Okay. I didn't even know that. The man arranged though. I mean, R.I.P. though, right?
Great Rutger Hauer, right? So
So I like how in this realistic world of Gotham City, he's the guy who manages finances. So as soon as Wayne's gone and Bruce gone and he wears sabbatical, is like, well, I control this shit now. So sorry, I like that, right? And speaking of that sabbatical, I like how that's how logical it feels, right? It's Bruce who. And he's constantly being told, you should do something. Oh, well, this your parents get killed. You should do something about it. He was about to kill Joe Chill after the case, and one of Carmine Falcone's assistants come and gun him down, this woman, right? And even when he confronts Carmine himself, right, he gets humiliated. It's like, well, you could have done something back then, right? And that kind of puts him on this journey where it's like, here's what, well, I need to learn about the criminal underworld, right? So it makes logical sense that he would just be bouncing from place to place, right? So yes, even though he finds himself in China, right? It's not like he just randomly went to China just because. It's just like you could tell the man lost his way. He clearly lost his way. He know where he want to go. He just don't know how to get there. That's the point. He just sort of aimlessly try to figure out what to do. That's all.
Yeah, it all felt like Dr. Strange ripped this off. But like in my head, I watched this and this is really like Doctor Strange origin story, right? Like is me or is it like that? It was kind of weird.
That's true. How he somehow finds himself in this, in this Chinese area, and then he confronts this mystic people. You're right.
I don't just apply to be Tibet. Like it's Tibet. Like
you're right.
China, but it's a whole thing. Well,
it's just where he got caught, where he was arrested was China or mainland China. I think it was right. But and then of course this is where we run into Durant. It's Durant, right? I think it's Durant, right? Who was played by by Liam Neeson, right? Which was great cast in my opinion. And this was around the time when he was getting big off of the first Taken movie, right? It's like, I mean, we know Liam Neeson. We know him, right?
I don't think of him like that. I just think of him as just a really solid character actor, for years. I didn't even think about his take, and I think, like, oh shit, I get Liam Neeson for this one. It's hard.
I know. And I just love that early conversation with him and Bruce in the jail, and especially that line where he drops, where you become more than a man. He says, legend Mr. Wayne. I love that moment. That's basically him saying, here's what, I gotta show you the way, but you have to go through this mission first, right? So yes, he finds the flower, he ends up in the... It's
really insidious stuff with who this dude is and why. And I was like, in my head, I'm watching the man face and I'm like, I hope they do. I wonder if they do it this way. But it'll be kind of amazing if they do this, because it's like a perfect villain to start Batman off with.
Yes,
perfect villain.
I like that.
Like, oh yeah, this is the character you probably should go with.
Yeah.
And I hope they do it. And then they reveal later a couple things. You'll see. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, and I love how. Well, we talk retrospectively now, right? I love how they play on, is he Ra's al Ghul or not, right? Because he says he represents Ra's al Ghul. He says that, right? And then when we go into this sort of monastery area where there's a bunch of ninjas involved, and by the way, mad points for the show for saying, every time you see Batman, he always uses these ninja techniques. Here's the first time you're going to see how this man learned ninja techniques. He actually learned from ninjas. Here we go.
Yeah, no, they play with it. They play with this in the animated series. There's a great little couple sub arcs where he shows up, goes to Japan and some ninja shit. I was like, yeah, right. Batman is basically a furry ninja, right?
But again, in live action form, we've never seen that. We just always treat it as, he know how to fight. So okay,
This sequence is so fucking cool, by the way. That whole when they just light it up and they move it.
First time I see that, I was like, holy shit, look at this. That trailer sequence with just all the rows of ninjas, I love that moment. Especially how Bruce fakes out Durant, though, especially with the cutting of the, with the wound on his arm. I love that, right? But I just love those early moments. And then for me, this is where this is Nolan true and true, right? Just the way how these moments are edited, right? How you just sort of cut back from moment to moment, right? So especially that moment where you're seeing Durant and Bruce on the ice fight with his swords. He talk about, the death of your parents was not, and he drops one of the best lines in the movie, right? The death of your parents was not your fault. It was your father's. It's the whole idea of the will to act. And I love how he kind of cements that in the film. You should have acted. You should have done something. I love that.
Right. No, they play with this in a real cool way, and again, because they had Ken Watanabe is a reasonably big actor at the time, because they did this was Last Samurai.
It was a few years after Last Samurai, which is a show I still defend.
So that's why. Yeah, so that's why I was hyped for this. So like, oh shit, Ken Watanabe is really good, but then they kill him off. I'm like, okay, so it's a fake out then. Like, what's going on here?
And speaking of that, as far as editing goes, I'll never forget the first time I see it. I was like, wait, no, that's a flop they do there with the editing, but then I realized, no, this is all intentional, where you see the fake Rish on the ground with the rubble on him, right?
Yeah.
They cut back to Bruce going after, moving away from the log for the fire and whatnot, right? Then you see Durant there. You see him there in the same spot. I always thought that was like some goof or something like that. It's like, no, that's what he saw. And we know, well, this is the first incident. Wait, no, we see this is some, like, there's a trick that's going on, right? I always thought, swear to God, that was some mistake. It's like, nope, that was all planned.
You see what you're talking about? That is Nolan at his best.
Yes.
That shit, he just catch you every time. Almost every time he'll catch you. It's only because you're accustomed to him as a filmmaker. Then you realize, all right, he's do that shit all the time. But boy, in the early days, boy, he used to catch you with that every damn time, George.
Exactly.
Again, it's not a surprise filmmaking and Magic have a big historical overlap, eh? You understand that shit.
Yeah.
Now, he really are great students of the craft. So they nailed this aspect of it, and there's a great sequence because how they played it. And it's only me as a like a Batman nerd be like, oh shit, like they ain't gonna kill off British, yeah, so right? Like they ain't gonna do that. But they had to go in and like, oh shit. So who's the Durant fella? Like in your head, you start calculating, but because I still enjoy the movie, I kind of forget. Like they got play this off later, and well they do later. But
and sorry, the guy's name is Ducard. My mistake, Ducard, right?
Sorry. Yeah. I don't remember. Obvious spoilers. Like it's a fake name, so I don't care.
Exactly. Also, again, I just love how Nolan plays with time as well, right? So you're not gonna get 2 years later, 3 years later. So like, there's a nice blink in the missing moment during that whole montage thing where Bruce is being trained by Ducard, right? Where you saw a guy, a prisoner in a cage, right? You just see him briefly, and then they cut back to them on the ice, right? Then they cut back to him again, and they say, "Oh, he's a thief. He stole some food, whatever it is, right?" And then now they get to the moment after he after he completes his training, right? Again, they're not telling you how long this process is, right? I'd say, oh, well, for your final test, you gotta kill this man because, and then they reveal the ultimate plan is we're gonna go to Gotham and pretty much purge it. I love how they set it up where they say, oh, we've been doing this for centuries, right? I think that's said there or later on when he reveals himself to be Ra's al Ghul, right? That, we've been doing this from time immemorial, if you will, right? There's a society, there's a big city, whatever, that is, revered as one of the greatest in the world. And sometimes it's just destroy itself from the ground up. We need to get rid of it. So we step in, right? I love that's all the detail you really need. You don't need no big reveal or backstory to why this group of ninjas do it. They just do it because they're the League of Shadows. That's it. That's why.
The thing is right. That's why it works as a good conceit because, again, as a Batman nerd, I already know what the League of Shadows are and who they are. So it's just I just watching what Nolan had to do with it and do with it. And he does a really good job of just a simple like, we just kind of like quiet and we just sack nations and blah 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 blah. And then if something get too rotten, we come in and sort it out. Total real world, like historical, borderline conspiracy theory kind of stuff that you play with. And Nolan does nail that. He's always nailed these kind of legend stuff. We get that with the Prestige, by the way. Like all that myth making in and around Nikola Tesla. He play with that real good and then weave it into a really cool take and approach. And I love that he do that with the League of Shadows here. Great call, great approach.
Yeah, one great thing that I admire about the show, rewatching this, right? It's how it takes its time building the character of Bruce Wayne, right? Because roughly an hour into the movies where you finally see him in the Batman outfit, where he actually like does this thing, right? But even when he returns to Gotham, it doesn't just simply happen just like, oh, he becomes Batman just like that, right? I love that, he pretty much brings Alfred into the fray, right? And I mean, just the mere fact that you got Michael Keane to play him, though, perfect.
Okay, so
You can make the argument that I think it's Pat Hingle, no, Michael Gough was the
Michael
better
Gough.
of the
All right, so
Alfreds. I think that it is
a little bit.
honestly
A
Alfred.
little bit.
I'll tell you why, but you go on.
No, it's one of those the real personality overwhelms the role kind of thing, right? There's my not I don't think it's a hotter stake, but this is kind of like Jack Nicholson and Joker. Like I like Jack Nicholson, but I don't think he's that great of a Joker, right? But because it's Jack Nicholson personality overwhelmed the conceit, you immediately think, for at least for a long time, at least until Heath Ledger, he dominated the Joker paradigm for a lot of people, right? Same thing on Michael Caine here. Michael Caine, yeah, let's think of him as the British gentleman, the almost like the stereotype of a British gentleman kind of thing. So him coming in as Alfred is like such a great call. I don't know, I don't super love it. Like I was never a super big fan. And again, super hot take. I think Jeremy Irons is like a superior Alfred by far. Even though it's not one of his worst
if I may interject, right? What I love about Michael Caine's Alfred is the emotion, the heart that he brings to his story. He is the father figure. Like, he really feels like a father figure, right? To Batman. He knows that, Bruce went through so much, right? It's like, look, like Thomas and Martha assigned me to take care of you, That's what I gotta do, Trent. I gotta leave you to do your thing, but I care for you. I got that. With Jeremy Irons, no. And to extent, the guy from who played Alfred in the Batman, Andy Serkis, right? Yeah.
Andy Serkis, right.
Yeah. Well, I would say Andy.
Andy not strong.
Right. I would say Andy and Jeremy. Andy and Jeremy felt like, okay, I'm working with the Batman. I'm helping you. I clean up after the Batman. That's how they felt, right? While like Michael Caine just felt like, look, I'm a concerned parent, I'm not stopping you from living your life and saving the world, but a concerned for you, Jim, because you're the last one and I want to take care of you. I've really felt that with him, right?
Right.
Yeah.
No, like I love the characterization as it is. Like it a lot of that works for what they do, like how they write him. They give him a pass. Like, the reason why, like, like some of his best moments is like in the second film where he just like give Bruce the advice about how to deal with Joker, and he say, yeah, sorry, it come from that paradigm of that history and how the British have to deal with things historically, and you could complain about colonialism or whatever it is, but it's like, yeah, these men have to do a job. Like, it's like, this person is too much of a problem, you have to sort them out. So you get that part of it from the father figure aspect of it. And I'm not knocking it. I know it's just a tone and approach that I don't really vibe it never stick with me. It does never gel. Even though I think Jeremy Irons gels a lot better with the conceit. But it's two different rules and it's fine. There's two different conceits, two different approaches. It's not a big deal, but like it just never stick with me. But but I apply the same thing to Christian Bale himself. Like I do like Christian Bale all that much, either as Batman or Bruce Wayne. But because it's such a strong film and it's just a strong story and great filmmaking, it overwhelms that. Like Batman v Superman is one of the worst things I ever watched. But I really like Ben Affleck and thing, but it's mostly because I like that more cartoonish comic book, the video game style of Batman in terms of the acrobatics. While in this, he kind of was clumsy in that suit, right? Like it was a little clumsy, and that's the problem with realism, right? It's a little weird. Like it's that, it's still looking goofy, a little bit. When it's time to move around and these kind of things. So that's just me. It's just my nitpick up. That's just a nitpick. My take on Batman's fine. Yeah, go ahead.
So yeah, just a touch on Batman here now. Again, we just watching things play out, right? So yes, the moment when he actually dons the outfit and does his crime fighting stuff really worked. Just him, fighting those bad guys in the shipping crates and whatnot worked for me.
Right.
And just, again, him incorporated not just in ninja techniques, but the stuff that we know about with Batman, right? Him hiding in the shadows and people wondering, oh my God, is this a monster trying to attack us? And of course, there's that great moment with the guy with the gun. He's like, where are you? And then Batman shows up to the left. Here. And pulls him in. I love that, right?
Most controversial thing in the Gravelly Boys.
Yes, it is. Here's the thing about it, though. Here's the thing. This is kind of weird in retrospect, right? His voice was not as gravelly as it was in the other two films. Even when he was talking to like Rachel or Alfred or whatever, it sounds generally normal. But he does have that gravelly tone just a bit, right? But yes, we have to talk about before we get to that moment, of course, he does the I'm Batman moment. It works, and especially when the music comes in, it works, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, we talked about it with Batman 89. Swear to me, where, what? I still love that moment. This is where he Oh gosh, this is the guy who works with James Gordon, right? Who, by the way, again, great casting, right? Gary Oldman, no, Gary Oldman as
Yeah.
Jim Gordon, holy shit,
Yeah,
right?
perfect.
But yes,
Right.
the shady cop, I forget his name right now, the shady cop who works alongside him, right? Yeah, when he's being interrogated, right?
I remember this is Bullock, but Bullock was never corrupt. Not really.
No, I know it's not Bullock, but I think he meant to
Okay.
be like Bullock, right? But yeah,
Right.
when he's being strung up and with the rain falling and Batman is interrogated about whatnot. I love that scene so much because of just the intensity of it all, right? And especially how Batman is just being so authoritative at this point, right? But yes, it's the where, me that how he just
Right.
really, really holding it on that gravelly voice though. Yes, I know it's a turn off for some people. I know like you. I know you just don't like that moment at all because of the overly gravelly voice, but I just love it because of the intensity of it all.
Yeah, no. The problem with the gravelly voice is that it's largely unnecessary. Like people act as if he's hiding his voice or something like that. It's like, nah, you don't need to do that. It's fine. Again, compared to Kevin Conroy, and again, that's the problem. This building on to be superior material in many ways. Kevin Conroy nearly the whole two tones aspect of it. Now you can just have a different tone. You don't need to do the gravelly voice thing. It is all thing.
Yeah, agreed, right? So, before we touch on villains, right, we have to talk about the great Morgan Freeman, playing Lucius Fox. This was another reason why I wanted to see him why I wanted to see the film now, is him, right? But just for me, I would admit I was not familiar with Lucius Fox at all as a character, right? I don't think I've seen him in any of the animated series up to this point. I think this is like the first time you've ever seen this character, who is actual comic book character, be represented in this in film form at all, right? I could be wrong, but this was the first time I saw Lucius Fox, right? I like the idea that he is just this guy, this scientist guy, this researcher guy who works in R&D, and he has access to all this tech and all this kind of stuff, right? But again, making things more grounded, yeah, he's basically the basement, right? He's doing this stuff, but he doesn't really know much about what's going on. Nor is he being told by Rutger Hauer's character, so what's going on, right? So you just sort of find things out after the fact, right? So the early moments with him and Bruce absolutely work, where it's like Bruce saying, yeah, I want to do spelunking, you know what I mean? Just like, and Lucius like, here's what, like, this is all your stuff anyway. Fine, whatever. I don't need to know, right? So I like that. Yeah, Lucius is technically the Q in this story, right? He is the Q to James Bond, right? Where it's like, oh, what does this do, or what does that do, right? And yes, this is where we are introduced to the Tumbler, and seeing it in the trailer, I had no problem with it. I like how it feels more militaristic than we've ever seen before. And that's the point.
At the time, like I'm not super Tumblr fan, but at the time this was such an inspired call, right? It's different, it's unique, and it makes sense because it's not it didn't make up some ridiculous fancy car out of nowhere. No, it's a military vehicle that has failed, because the military does always do that. The American military always have these ideas that kind of sound cool, but when you actually it's time to apply it or either be too expensive or don't work the way it should or something like that. But it's be a really great idea. Nobody will ever apply it to something else. So it's like, all right, cool. I apply it to his own machinations, and I work. Such a great, simple world building answer.
Yeah, indeed, right? And then you got the great line. This is coming black. Like, I love that, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and then of course you get this great, like, still stellar chase scene involving the police and the Tumbler, right? At this mad point for him just using it above ground though, like he is, as one of the characters say, he's flying off rooftops. I love that, right? At just that moment, especially when you hear the music in the background, is brilliant in my opinion, right? So let me touch on the villains for a bit, right? I was surprised though, right? That let me just go in all the way up, right? That Warner Brothers was saying, here's what, right? In this new revamped Batman, right? We're gonna make Scarecrow the main villain, or at least that's what we thought in quotes, right? I was surprised. Like, I thought it was going to be Ra's al Ghul. He was going to be the villain, right? But then you don't see much of him. Okay, you think he's dead in quotes, but then you see Scarecrow, right, who is played by Cillian Murphy, right? And of course, I was familiar with Cillian Murphy through 20 Days Later, right? But I never saw him. Well, I should say I never would have imagined that he would be in a Batman movie, right? And let alone play the villain, right? And it's so funny because look, years later, the man with an Oscar for Oppenheimer, which is a Nolan film, right?
Stick with the boy Nolan, you know. Stick with the boy.
Yeah, he stick with him. He stick with him true and true. I would not lie, right? But in terms of a character, I like this version of the Scarecrow that we see here, right? It's not so much a bad doctor, it's just this overconfident doctor. This is this guy who feels, all right, I experimented with patients in Arkham Asylum and nobody could tell me what to do, because if anybody asks me anything, I can just talk some shit, talk some jargon, and be like, no, this actually is beneficial, and it's just for people to just shut up and leave him alone, and he just doing all kind of weird, terrible things to patients, right? But then you learn early on actually is that he is working for a certain someone, and he's on his way, right? He come into Gotham, and you just say like, I know who it is, but I want to see the reveal, right? Speaking of reveal. I love that moment where he puts on the mask for the first time. And this is where he's interrogated Carmine Falcone, who is arrested, right? And they kind of studied, I should say, Rachel now is now ordered, well, wait now, why you want to move him to Arkham all of a sudden? Or why you considering this for, right? So yeah, you see Scarecrow, right? Jonathan Crane, right? He's talking to Carmine, right? And then he pulls on the mask like, hey, I have this little mask that I use here during my sessions. Just paraphrasing, the patients, they find it so scary. But, I like that he's played on, look at me and look at how I look. Like, I don't look intimidated. But what I put on this mask now is something different. And then he sprayed the gas, right? The hallucinogenic gas, right? And that's where you see, so he's seeing things now, right? I love, in retrospect, that it is the fear of the person who was gassed, who was sprayed on, right? So, like in the case of Batman, when he is sprayed later on, he seen bats, right? I love, like, visually you see the bats coming out of the mask, right? And even the mask itself works, right? Because though we can't do the actual Scarecrow look that we know from the animated series, but let me just use the same sort of material, that same sort of what do you call it? That green bag kind of look. If you look at the material of the mask, it looks like if you put like bags of green or whatever it is, it have that kind of look to it, right?
Right.
And that's the material. I like that. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's another like really simple kind of masterstroke from Nolan in terms of squaring things and making it make sense. Like, how we could get Scarecrow in this? Well, it's a hallucinogen. That's where you see it. So like, is anybody, if you take ayahuasca or whatever it is, it's that.
Yeah.
Right? You go basically, you have a trip and you have a bad trip. This thing will always give you a bad trip. Great, love it.
Yeah.
Simple answer. Put it out. Yeah.
And even the action sequence involving Scarecrow, his goons were technically Carmine's goons, right? And Batman really, really works. That was one of my favorite moments, right? This is technically in Arkham, right? I always loved Jonathan's reaction when he knows Batman's coming. Yeah, boy.
Yeah,
it's the Batman. I was like, what do we do, boss? What you always do when a burglar comes around? Call the police. I love that moment so much though. Again, it's the overconfidence. The man really feels like, yo, I know what I do in the house. Trust me. Trust me. But he not prepared. He's not prepared. I love it.
He's not prepared. But they could have a great follow-up to that in the second film in the beginning. Stuff like that. It's like, yeah. And it's just good acting. And there's a good how the camera moves and just sets up the scene really well. It's really good stuff.
Yes, exactly. And then, of course, Batman, and I love how they set up early on, theatricality and deception. Yeah, dude, he actually kind of do something that, like, say, the Tim Burton Batman would do. Just set a whole squad of bats just to divert the attention of the bad guys or whatnot, and sneak in and basically save Rachel. Okay, yeah, Rachel was in the asylum at the time and she got sprayed as well, right? And she was about to OD and he had to go and save her and all that kind of stuff, right? But there's a great moment actually where Jonathan gets sprayed as well and he sees Batman, and just that it's a simple designer, but is that veering into Man-Bat territory where he looks almost gargoyle-like? I just love how you just seeing that almost like oil. Yeah, almost like oil just coming out of the bad teeth. He's like, I love that shot. That looks so great. But yeah, you're right. It is kind of harkened back to the whole Man-Bat character, but it's just that visual. I forget
Man-Bat character.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's total character. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's move a little quickly here, right? So of course now we reveal the ultimate plan, right? So a microwave emitter was stolen, and you learn it's all part of this big elaborate scheme involving the whole test that he was doing, Jonathan Crane was doing with the whole gas or whatnot, right? So it all leads to that, right? As far as character moments go, I think this moment is one of the best, right? So I was like a few days old, right, when I found out that at this particular moment, right, where it is a birthday party basically for Bruce, right? Dude is 30 years. because there's a shot like if you look far off to the left, right, to the left of the screen, you see 30. But the way how they frame it, it's almost like you're not really supposed to notice it. But if you look closely, you'll see 30. Like I didn't even look at that though. Like,
Batman's supposed to be around that age still, so it's fine.
Yeah. So this moment always worked for me, right? Where this is where after him saving Rachel and whatnot, right? He started to understand, and this is what Alfred was really reeling about, all right? The idea of, okay, well, you want to be Batman, but at the same time you want to be this rich billionaire, right? Because even when he come back, quote unquote, into Wayne, into the Wayne industry, right? Yeah, he started play on the playboy, persona, right? There's actually a moment where he goes into this hotel and literally have these two models and they just jump inside of a pool just so. But you understand why, right? He's poking fun at the 1%, even though he is a 1%, right? So that's the point of it, right? But because he knows so much about the world now, it's just like, yeah, they don't know nothing, like people suffering, they just the eating, having fun, right? Fuck all that, right? So yeah, this is why this moment works for me, right? Where you have a whole bunch of rich people attending this party and he shows up, right? And because he knows about what's going to happen, right? Especially when he sees that there are a couple of shady people around. It's just like, here's what. All they need to go because all they're full of shit and all they just come to drink my booze and all they don't know me, just leave me alone. Just go. All they don't care about me, right? Just go. I love it.
But the reveal of who was at the party is great. Like oh shit, he's alive.
Yes,
bring it back.
And that reveal, I would say one moment, one comic book film moment that rivals that is the Vulture in Spider-Man Homecoming. That reveal where it's like, oh, this guy came to see you and you look so. Boom. And in this case is Ducard. But you tell yourself, wait, Ducard?
Nope.
He's Rachel Gould. It's like, wow.
Yeah, great reveal.
Yeah, great drop, right? And at the time, I could not even care less that, but then Rachel Gould supposed to be Asian? Like, why are you telling me this?
No, don't matter. No.
It don't matter. It does not matter. That's the point.
In the context of this, it's fine. It totally works.
Yeah, I love that reveal. I love that, even as somebody who is marginally familiar with the character, I'd have to stop and be like, wait, now Liam Neeson's playing him? That would make sense. That's like, it's supposed that, we're just whitewashing the characters. Like, no, it doesn't matter. It's all about, it's all about deception. That's what it is. Yeah.
Exactly. I don't have a problem with that in the context of it. That's perfectly fine.
Yeah. And just the banter that they have, that's just basically him saying, this was the plan all along, Dread. Like, the plan basically was for me to come in here, Dread, and, just do damage. That's what it is, right? And then, of course, the big master stroke of it all is that I'm using the microwave emitter now because the liquid, the formula, if you will, right? The hallucinogenic stuff was in the water, but I need to spread it, right? So that's why the emitter is there, to spread it.
Yeah, no, this is a goofy comic book plot, but
is it? For me, it's not something that feels realistic, but it's just like, how's a practical way to get through the city? Okay.
Yeah, it's a total comic book thing. And it's a total Batman plot. It's perfect. It's fine.
True. It is, right, yeah.
With the whole What Version thing, it wasn't like a big deal because it worked in the context of the story. And it's not like we call it by like can't sing from Star Trek. Not that bullshit.
Oh,
right?
Lord. Star Trek Into Darkness. It's Into Darkness or the old part two?
Into Darkness.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
That's the thing. It works in the context because like the whole point of this guy is that you're not supposed to know he is. It could be anybody kind of thing. That aspect of it totally works.
So yeah, that being said though, I can understand some people not really liking it, even then and now, right? Because of how grounded it is and how it takes itself so seriously, and we want the onomatopoeia on screen, and we want to see, you more prefer the Tim Burton stuff, right? The gothic stuff or the theatrical circus-like stuff of Joel Schumacher's films, right? I think because of Batman, the nature of Batman, you can interpret that character in so much ways, right? I don't want to say since this movie came out, right? But I would say in the 2000s up to now, right? I mean, Batman has been incarnated in so much ways. Like, look, I just talked about Batman Ninja, right? The sequel, which I think really works, right? So there's so much ways that you could interpret this character, right? So no, you don't have to like the Nolan Batman series. You don't have to care for it if you don't like it. That's fine, right? But there's no denying just the impact that this show left as far as just the comic book film world does, right? And I'll make the argument that if it wasn't for this, the MCU wouldn't even exist, right? So this was a moment where comic book movies really had to be taken seriously, right? It wasn't just Spider-Man was in one thing. No, it was DC had to have their moment, right? And they got that there with Batman Begins, right? And the rest is history. So for me, light 4.5 out of 5. This is one of the best superhero films I've ever seen. One of the best superhero films ever made. One of the best movies of the 2000s, bar none. And of course, Dark Knight is a 5 out of 5, like instantly. And I would still give The Dark Knight Rises a 4 out of 5, right? A strong 4 out of 5, even with its flaws, right? And whatnot, right? But I love the trilogy, for what it is. And I mean, we wouldn't have had one if it wasn't for this film here, right? And lastly, like I said, this was a movie where Christopher Nolan was like, here's what, I could really make big budget tentpole films, right? I could really bring in an audience here and still have my style and ideologies in my film, right? And I mean, here we are now celebrating this film a year after he dropped 2 years actually since he dropped Oppenheimer, right? So Ricardo, your final thoughts rating on Batman Begins, and if you wanna just touch briefly on how it impacted the trilogy as a whole and all that stuff.
This is a movie that I really strongly appreciate. I can't say I super love it, but I strongly appreciate its existence and how it shaped the paradigm of how filmmaking, or at least comic book filmmaking, should be done, in my opinion. For better or for worse, we got to take a lot of people take the wrong lessons from this film, and or get a kind of, I call it the kind of cargo culting problem, where people think they could do this and they don't understand the craft and the skill that's taken, and the research and the smart decision you need to do to pull off the whole grounded comic book thing. A lot of people just think they could just up and do this thing, and it's kind of fuck it up, to be honest. But that's about it. I thoroughly love this for what it was and what we're trying to do. So a true classic and a historical conceit for what it was trying to do. Yeah, really well done.
Right. Well, what would you rate it, man? And if you want to, you can rate the others.
8 out of 10. Love it. Classic. Really works. Solid stuff.
Right, and of course, Dark Knight is... What does he give it when we spoke about it? I think he gave it a 9 or 10.
I give it like a 9. Like a next up perfect score, probably. Close. 9 or probably even a 10. But it's, more likely a 9. I have a couple of nitpicks with the description, but that's up.
Right, and out of curiosity, Dark Knight Rises. 5 or 6?
No, not so low, but it's like a 7 or a low 7. I mean... It's better in my head than when I give it a rewatch, but it has too many problems that I hard to ignore. Is that?
Right. Yeah.